So this is the blood review. First off, you want to make sure that you remember the functions of blood. This is pretty obvious. I'm not asking any specific questions about this, but this should be pretty obvious, and it'll help you out with some of the other information. So I'm not going to purely ask a question on this, on memorization of this, but it's a good overview to remember. One thing you want to remember is all the parts of blood. Remember, blood is actually called whole blood, and whole blood is made of two things: plasma and formed elements. The formed elements include erythrocytes, which is the most abundant. So you want to remember, if I say to you, what's the most common blood cell, you would say erythrocytes. If I say to you, what's the most common formed element, the answer still is erythrocytes. So erythrocytes are red blood cells, leukocytes are white blood cells, and platelets are also called thrombocytes. Okay? Thrombocytes. Now, again, I don't care about the percentages. What I want you to remember is that the most abundant are erythrocytes, red blood cells. For plasma, you just want to remember the different parts. Okay, obviously you want to remember that water is the most abundant of plasma. And obviously there's proteins in there, and then there's other solutes like sodium, potassium, but you don't have to remember the percentages. Okay? You want to generally remember that there's 4 to 6 liters. For temperature, you want to remember that the temperature of blood is around 38 degrees Celsius. Body temperature is around 37. So you want to remember that the temperature of blood is warmer than oral body temperature. Because when we say body temperature, we mean oral body temperature. In other words, when they put the thermometer in your mouth. Okay. So again, which is warmer, body temperature or blood temperature? Blood temperature. Which is warmer, blood temperature or body temperature? Blood. Which is warmer? Blood. Which is warmer? Blood. Okay. Blood is highly viscous. Viscous means thick. And remember, it's more viscous than water. So which is more viscous, water or blood? Blood. Which is more viscous, water or blood? Blood. What's the most abundant blood cell? Erythrocytes. What's the most abundant blood cell? Erythrocytes. What's another word for erythrocyte? Red blood cell. What's the most abundant blood cell? Erythrocyte. You want to make sure you remember the pH. The pH is 7.35 to 7.45. Okay, so it's in between 7.35 and 7.45. Which is thicker, water or blood? Blood. So which one's more viscous? Water or blood? Blood. What's the other word for viscous? Thick. What's the other word for viscous? Thick. Okay. Now, you don't need to worry about, I'm not going to put fractionation on the exam. I'm not going to talk about EDTA. You don't have to know, even though I did the colors in the lecture, don't worry about the colors of ETA being purple and heparin being green. I'm not going to ask that on the exam. We will talk about heparin as it relates, if you remember, to mast cells. Remember, mast cells secrete heparin. Okay, so we'll talk about that, but I'm not going to talk about test tubes and things like that. That I'm not going to put on a test. But I do want you to remember that plasma proteins, that 90% are made in the liver. So I don't even care about actually the 90%. I just want you to remember majority. Okay? Majority of plasma proteins are produced in the liver. So what are the majority of the plasma proteins made by? Liver. What are the majority of the plasma proteins made by? Liver. Is albumin a plasma protein? Yes. Is globulin a plasma protein? Yes. Is fibrinogen a plasma protein? Yes. So albumin, globulins, and fibrinogens are what? Plasma proteins. What organ makes albumin? Liver. What organ makes globulins? Mostly liver. That's not always the case. And what is fibrinogen? Liver. Now, guys, I'm not going to ask you like the majority of globulins are made by what organ. I just want you to remember the key thing is I want you to remember the majority of plasma proteins are produced by the what? Liver. That's the important part. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. Does albumin transport hormones? Yes. Does albumin transport hormones? Yes. What type of hormones? Lipid-based hormones. What does albumin transport? Lipid-based hormones. What does it transport? Lipid-based hormones. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. Plasma proteins are made by the what? Majority are made by the what? Liver. Globulins, okay? One type of globulin is called immunoglobulin. What's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. What's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. How do you write down immunoglobulins? IG. How do you write down antibodies? IG. Now, reason it's IG is because what's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. What's another word for antibody? Immunoglobulin. What's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. Next. Now remember, guys, whenever you see something like apo, lipo, protein, the major structure is the last word. So protein is the large structure. So one type of apolipoprotein are lipoproteins, HDL and LDL. So is this primarily a lipid or a protein? And the answer is protein. Okay, so it's primarily a what? Protein. So is HDL and LDL cholesterol, or is it a protein? It's a protein. What is HDL and LDL? A protein. What does HDL and LDL do? They carry cholesterol. Okay, so they're not made of cholesterol, they carry cholesterol. So when you take, and we'll talk about this in another, further on, you have to know it now, and you will be learning it when we get to GI again, okay, in more depth. But if I say to you, what is the majority, HDL and LDL, are they proteins or cholesterol? What would your answer be? They're proteins, okay? They're primarily proteins. Remember, the last word always tells you what it is. Does HDL and LDL carry cholesterol? Yes. Okay? Remember, cholesterol, remember this from the previous review, cholesterol is what makes up what? Steroids. Are steroids made of lipids? Yes. So therefore, is cholesterol a lipid? Yes. Therefore, is cholesterol and steroids both lipids? Yes. Are they therefore carried by HDL and LDL? Yes. And is HDL and LDL a protein? Yes. Okay, so just kind of like work it in reverse and work it forward, and you'll be good. Okay? Another transport globulin is thyroxine binding globulin, and if you remember, TBG carries what? T3 and T4. Okay? So remember, we talked about this on the last review, is that steroid hormones and thyroid hormones both require a what? Carrier. These are the carriers. So HDL and LDL and TBG are what? Carriers. Now, are they made of lipids? Are they made of lipids, carbohydrates, or proteins? And the answer is what? Proteins. Okay. Fibrinogen, we'll do this a little bit more depth in a little bit. Fibrinogen is used to form what? Clots. What is fibrinogen used to form? Clots. What is fibrinogen used to form? Clots. Okay. Key here. What's the difference between serum and plasma? The only difference is that serum does not have clotting factors. Does not have these clotting factors. Plasma has clotting factors. Serum does not. So does serum have clotting factors? No. Does serum have clotting factors? No. Does plasma have clotting factors? Yes. Does whole blood have clotting factors? Yes. Does whole blood have clotting factors? Yes. Does serum have clotting factors? No. What's the most abundant blood cell? Erythrocytes. What's the most abundant blood cell? Erythrocytes. What is used to carry steroid hormones? HDL and LDL. What's used to carry steroid hormones? HDL and LDL. Is HDL and LDL a lipid or a protein? Protein. Is HDL and LDL a lipid or a protein? Protein. What's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. What's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. What's another word for antibody? Immunoglobulin. What's another word for immunoglobulin? Antibody. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumins. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumins. What organ makes albumin? Liver. What organ makes the majority of plasma proteins? Liver. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. What is the pH of blood? 7.35 to 7.45. What's the pH of blood? 7.35 to 7.45. What's the pH of blood? 7.35 to 7.45. What exactly is 7.35 to 7.45? The pH of blood. What is 7.35 to 7.45? The pH of blood. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. What's the most abundant plasma protein? Albumin. Albumin is the most abundant what? Plasma protein. What's the most abundant formed element? Erythrocytes. What's the most abundant formed element? Erythrocytes. Does serum have clotting factors? No. What's the difference between serum and plasma? Plasma has clotting factors and serum does not. Plasma has clotting factors, serum does not. Plasma has clotting factors, serum does not. Okay? Is sodium found in the blood? Yes. Is potassium found in the blood? Yes. Is calcium found in the blood? Yes. Okay, now, what is the function of erythrocytes? Carry gases. What are the two gases? O2 and CO2. What are the two gases carried by red blood cells? O2 and CO2. What's the shape of an erythrocyte? Biconcave disc. What is the shape of an erythrocyte? Biconcave disc. What's the most abundant blood cell? Erythrocytes. Does the red blood cell have a nucleus? No. Does the red blood cell have a nucleus? No. So do we call that nucleated or anucleated? Anucleated. Does anucleated mean with a nucleus or without a nucleus? Without. Does anucleated mean with a nucleus or without a nucleus? Without. What's the average size of a red blood cell? 7.2 micrometers. What's the average width of a red blood cell? 7.2 micrometers. What is 7.2 micrometers? The average width. It should be circumference, guys. I keep saying width, but circumference. That's really the proper term. Circumference. Does a red blood cell have a nucleus? No. Do erythrocytes have a nucleus? No, because erythrocyte and red blood cell are the same thing. Are erythrocytes nucleated or anucleated? Anucleated. What's the lifespan of a red blood cell? 120 days. What's the average lifespan in days of a red blood cell? 120 days. How many months is that? 4 months. So what's the average lifespan of a red blood cell? 120 days. Is there a mitochondria in the red blood cell? No. Is there a mitochondria in the red blood cell? No. What gives blood its color? Hemoglobin. What gives blood its color? Hemoglobin. If it's oxygenated, is it bright red or burgundy? Bright red. If it's oxygenated, is it bright red or burgundy? Bright red. What's another word for platelet? Thrombocyte. What's another word for platelet? Thrombocyte. Are platelets involved in blood clotting? Yes. Are platelets involved in blood clotting? Yes. Are platelets involved in blood clotting? Yes. What's another word for platelet? Thrombocyte. What's another word for platelet? Thrombocyte. Erythrocytes. What is the shape of the erythrocyte? Biconcave disc. What's the lifespan of a red blood cell in days? 120 days. In months? 4 months. In days? 120 days. In days? 120 days. In months? 4 months. In months? 4 months. Is erythrocyte nucleated or anucleated? Anucleated. Is a basophil, eosinophil, and neutrophil a type of leukocyte? Yes. What's another word for leukocyte? White blood cell. What's another word for leukocyte? White blood cell. What's another word for white blood cell? Leukocyte. What's another word for white blood cell? Leukocyte. Are basophils, eosinophils, and neutrophils granulocytes? Yes. So we talked about Ben, right? Ben, B-E-N. So who has the granules? Ben. Who has the granules? Ben. So if those are granulocytes, these are agranulocytes. So monocytes and lymphocytes, are they granulocytes or agranulocytes? Agranulocytes. What's another word for white blood cell? Leukocyte.